Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thank you all for coming out on this cold night, but it's only 5 below, and someone told me it's going to be 25 below tomorrow. So this is balmy warm. So I don't know, we better get used to it, right? Welcome, and I warmly welcome you to St. Philip the Deacon. This is the Restore 2 series, and this is our 3rd session for 2020. How many of you were here last week for the Faith in Life, and how many of you are you gonna hike that 2,000 miles? Are you all ready for that after that? Yeah, she did a very good job. She has an interesting book, and I think there's still some available. Then who was able to be here the week before that for our 2nd session of the Restore 2? Yeah, great. It was so much fun. Who had fun last time? Who hurt? I did hear some ows and some going like, oh, during it, but it was really, really fun, and I really appreciate that, everyone who came out. And we have another, I'm going to give you an opportunity now for formal feedback on how you liked that session and the session before. So there'll be evaluation sheets tonight that you can fill out afterwards, and I'll also be emailing them to you so you can give us some more feedback as to what you want to do in the next Restore series, or what you liked about this one, or what we can do better in the future ones. So thank you for all your feedback ahead of time. I appreciate it. And hello to everybody who's live streaming tonight. I know there's quite a few of you, so welcome, and we're happy to have you here. I'm going to start with a prayer. My name is Susan Path. I'm the parish nurse here at St. Philip the Deacon, and I have a real passion for Restore, and as most nurses do, and most things that we do here at St. Philip really do help restore you in some way. And we'll begin with a prayer as we start this session today. God of great goodness and mercy, thank you for granting us all the opportunities to slow down and seek your presence and your face tonight. With all these wonderful people you have made in your own image, help us to use the gifts and senses that you have created in us, and seek and quench our spiritual thirst for you daily as we quench our earthly thirst for water. Open our ears to hear what will be most useful for us to connect with you and your healing love. Amen. Pastor Strand Patterson suggested that I meet with Joel Warne for coffee at Caribou. So we met at Caribou, and I just was impressed by the calmness he radiated. So on nothing else, I thought we should hire him just because of that and have him come and speak to us, because he made me feel very calm, and that's one of the things that he's best at, I guess. Joel, who is giving the presentation tonight, is the spiritual director and co-founder of WellSpring Life Resources. WellSpring offers a wide range of retreats, workshops, counseling, and events that helps participants live more fully out their identity in Christ. Joel has written spiritual formation material used widely, and you can find him at www.wellfreshed.com. Joel's presentation tonight is Deep Rest in Quiet with God, and I don't know how many of us take that time every day to do that, but he's going to teach us a lot about that, especially now before Lent. Lent will be starting the end of this month, and give us a time to use these resources and tools that he is giving us. He'll be giving his presentation. He has some questions or some question and answer periods during his presentation, so we'll be using the mic. It would be really wonderful if you'd walk up to the mic and talk into it. Otherwise, if you wave me down, I can either listen to your question and restate it into the mic. But we just want everyone at home to hear the answers and the questions, okay? Will you help me out that way? And at the close, we'll have, after, I don't know if he'll end with questions and answers. At the end, it depends if you still have some left. But we do have parting gifts for you. So when you're leaving, there are 2 parting gifts and the evaluation form. So please pick those up on your way out. Does everyone have tonight's handout that you picked up, that were on the back table? Okay, if you don't, raise your hand and we'll get one to you. But Joel will be using that during his presentation, and his slideshow is up on this screen, so you should be able to see that well. And welcome to Joel Warne. Thank you for coming. And the one fun fact about Joel, he lives like a stone's throw from our church. And I asked him if he walked tonight, but he did not. But
I could have rolled down 101 easily and gotten here. Hi, everybody. Super to be with you. And thank you, Susan. So you guys know Susan. We are just getting to know each other over these last months as she's helped me prepare for tonight. Really have appreciated working with you, Susan.
Thank you.
You know, totally bright spirit, totally organized, but gives you space to do what you do. So just been super. You really bring it. Yeah, so I'm Joel with this ministry called WellSpring. And what WellSpring is about is being with people in settings like this or other retreat settings, classes, workshops, trying to be helpful to each other toward moving into that kind of intimate, safe, more warm place between ourselves and one another and ourselves and God. So hope that's where we're going tonight. We'll see if we're successful. Let me begin like this. My daughter Monica is a labor and delivery nurse, and she lives with her family not far from here. 5 kids. The last 3 kids she delivered at home. And the last child was delivered via a pool birth. You know, a pool birth. Some of you guys have been connected with something like that. So you buy or you rent what looks like an oversized bathtub, kind of soft-sided, and you fill it with water just of the right temperature. And it's just this maybe more natural and helpful way to deliver your baby. So Monica's last baby, our granddaughter, Annalise, was born via a pool birth. And at that time, our granddaughters, Grace and Lydia, were 8 and 6. And Monica's very progressive in her thinking, so she invited the girls to think about whether they wanted to be with her in the delivery room, which was their bedroom. And so Grace is 8, Lydia's 6, and they thought about this very seriously for some months. And in the end, Grace decided no, she would listen at the door. And Lydia, though, who wants to be a veterinarian when she grows up, and so she's into all things biological, she wanted to be present. So my wife, Jerry, was with Lydia in the delivery room, just in case things got too intense, but it all went great. And I saw the video, this moment when Annalise, our brand new granddaughter, came up out of the water after being born, right? And it's just this transcendent moment, very transporting. So we get the report, everything's good. Those of us who are waiting outside the room. But about 5 minutes later, we get a request to pray for the baby because the baby's breathing has become way, way too elevated. So the baby is breathing at an elevation, kind of a fast breathing rate that's actually dangerous for the baby. So pray for the baby. And so what had happened was the baby was born and was laid on Monica's chest as she lay in the pool, and everything was fine for about 20 minutes. And then the time came for Monica to transfer from the pool to her bed. And during that space of about 10 or 15 minutes, when the baby was handed to the assistant to the midwife, the baby, I don't know if the baby just got like, this is not quite right. You are not my mother. I don't know exactly what was happening. But the baby got sort of panicky almost, and the breathing went really fast, too fast. So what they did, and what sometimes works in situations like this, is they took our brand new granddaughter, who was naked at that time, and put her skin to skin on Monica's chest as she lay in the bed. And over the course of about a half hour, the baby's breathing and the baby's elevated heart rate kind of enters the rhythm of the loving parent. So slowly, gradually, the child, it's like it gets in sync. When it's that in that sort of an intimate posture, an intimate position with the loving parent. And I want to begin by giving you that picture, if it's helpful to you. The idea of being skin to skin with the loving parent and entering into the rhythm of the parent. You know, if you're like me, some of us are coming in here tonight and we're breathing pretty fast, right? And our heartbeat maybe is kind of elevated. Life just throws so many things in our direction, so many things that we're supposed to solve and confront and face every day, that sometimes we're breathing pretty fast. The comedian George Carlin once said he was so shocked by what he found the day he entered this world that he couldn't speak for 2 years. And it is a kind of a shocking world that we find ourselves in. And so how do you get the breathing rate down? You know, how do you get the heartbeat down? Well, one fundamental way that we're invited to is to kind of, can we develop a regular practice of going skin to skin with God, so to speak, if I can put it that way. Tonight is about this idea of a sort of a prayer which is immediate in its contact with God. There's an immediacy. There's a direct contact. There's a sort of a spirit-to-spirit connection in the type of prayer that I'm going to share with you about tonight. And since tonight is about, the title for tonight is Deep Rest in Quiet with God. Since tonight is about quiet and a sort of bringing the breathing level down and relaxing, I thought we'd just take a moment right at the beginning and begin to taste a little bit of it, okay? As we go tonight, I'm going to describe this way of prayer, and later we're going to practice it more fully so that you've had a taste of it a bit tonight. But now, to begin, I want to just let us kind of relax down, and I've got a little piece of scripture. I got one verse from the Old Testament I'd like to read over us as a kind of a blessing, and then we'll move off from there. So I have a verse from the book of Deuteronomy, and I'm going to read this verse over us 3 times. A little bit of pause in between. I'd encourage you to hear these words as though written for you. Let the beloved of the Lord rest secure in him for he shields him all day long. And the one the Lord loves rests between his shoulders. Let the beloved of the Lord rest secure in him, for he shields her all day long. And the one the Lord loves rests between his shoulders. Let the beloved of the Lord rest secure in him, for he shields him all day long. And the one the Lord loves rests between his shoulders. Amen. So deep rest in quiet with God. The University of Virginia did a study some years ago that went like this. A volunteer was brought into a room, and the room was completely emptied of furniture. There was nothing on the walls. There were no windows in this room. It was just a room with a chair placed at the center. And the volunteer was to sit in the chair and had agreed before taking part in this study that sitting in that chair, they would press a little button that was to their right, which would administer an electric shock to the volunteer. And so at the beginning of every study, the volunteer sits in the chair and administers a shock to him or herself. And it's a painful shock. It's not fatal, but it hurts. And every subject is asked, would you pay a certain amount of money to not be shocked again during this study? And everybody answered yes. I would pay some amount of money not to have to experience that shock. So then, okay, that's the first part of the study. Now, what the subject is to do is to sit alone in that room, in that chair, can't get up out of the chair, for 12 minutes with their own thoughts. They've left all their devices out of the room. There's nothing to look at in the room. There's no window to look out. They're not allowed to stand up and walk around to sort of make time go by more quickly. They're to just sit there with their own thoughts for 12 minutes. But if they want to, they are allowed to shock themselves again. If it becomes too painful to sit in the silence for 12 minutes and they need a distraction badly, they can shock themselves. All right? 70% of men shocked themselves. They found it too hard to sit alone with their own thoughts for 12 minutes. 70% of men shocked themselves. 25% of women also shocked themselves. Our relationship with quiet is tenuous at best. Some of us were wired that way. We yearn for it. It's nourishing to us. Others of us, it's a challenge. And there are so many ways to avoid the quiet now today in the culture in which we live that we don't have to experience quiet if we don't want to. But you've come tonight knowing what the topic is, so my guess is you're sensing, you're intuiting that there could be something in quiet. Maybe there's a richness there. Maybe there's some fruitfulness that we can experience in quiet, that we can discover together. So tonight, I'm going to spend a little while talking about this sort of prayer, which some of you guys will be familiar with and are probably practicing already. So this sort of prayer, the prayer of quiet, I'm going to talk about that a little bit. I'm going to share with you some of the fruit of cultivating a prayer life that includes this dimension of prayer. Then we're going to actually practice this together a bit so that you can go away tonight saying, that's something that's intriguing. That's something I could experience more of. Or, yep, glad I tried it. Never have to do that again. It's up to you how you respond to it, but you're going to get a little taste of it tonight. And then we're going to do some sharing, some thoughts, insights that you might have, questions you might have. All right, so let's start like this. It sounds like you all have handouts. Those handouts are going to correspond exactly with what's on the screen over here. So you can either look at your handouts or you can look at the screen. Let's start like this. There is a way of prayer which has sort of been handed down over the centuries that looks like this. There are many, many ways of prayer, but this is a sort of a classic, ancient way of prayer that many of us have handed down to us in our traditions. It involves 4 steps. And the first step is to read. The second step is to reflect. The third, to respond. And finally, to rest. So often when you sit down, you're going to begin to pray. You just need something to begin to warm the heart, right? Something to engage the heart. And so that's that first step, reading. And often it's recommended you read the scriptures, and maybe in the scriptures you read the Psalms. The Psalms have been called the Bible's prayer book because they tend to stir prayer. The things that the psalmist experiences in life transcends the centuries, and we experience those very things today, those very emotions, those fears, those feelings. So it's good to start in the Psalms. And then the next step goes on to reflect. Now we're gonna have read a piece of scripture, maybe from the Psalms. Now we're gonna notice what kind of response that stirs in us. Okay, how is that resonating? What stirs? What feels attractive? What feels compelling? Is there a word in the passage, or a phrase, or a picture, or a theme that especially is connecting with what I'm experiencing in my own world right now? Okay? So we reflect on what's stirring. The next step is to respond. Now you express what is stirring. Maybe it's awe, feeling of awe. Maybe a feeling of thanks. Maybe it's a feeling of anger, or of loneliness, or sorrow, or worship. Whatever is real, whatever is stirred, is what gets expressed. And you can express this many ways. Oftentimes it's through oral prayer. We speak our prayer. We pray in the way that we most often think of prayer. But sometimes we want to sing in response to what's stirred. Maybe we want to journal our thoughts in response to what's been stirred. Maybe we want to move around. Maybe we want to dance, create some art, write a poem. But now we're expressing, or we're responding to what's been stirred. And finally, after some time of that, the last step, and this is sort of the step that we're talking particularly about tonight, the last step in this sequence is to rest. Now we're resting silently, wordlessly, quietly with God. This last step is sort of like maybe you've had this experience. You ever held a newborn baby in your arms, or a really young baby in your arms, and maybe you've fed the baby now, and you've changed the baby, they've gotten the baby comfortable, and there's sometimes you get to experience these magic fleeting moments when you're beholding the baby and the baby is beholding you. You know, you're exchanging gazes with the child. That's sort of what we're talking about in this rest dimension of prayer. It's our hearts gazing on God's heart. In fact, there's a great little story, maybe some of you have heard, about the French cleric who hears that a congregation member is supposed to have a really deep prayer life. And first, the cleric is kind of miffed that anybody should be thought to have had a deeper prayer life than his, but he kind of humbles himself and he goes to this congregation member, and she's just a peasant living there a couple hundred years ago in France, but she's renowned for her prayer world. And so the cleric goes and he asks her, I understand you have a very deep prayer life. What is the secret of your prayer life? And the woman responds, she's kind of bewildered, what's my secret? But she says, there is no secret. I gaze at Jesus, and Jesus gazes at me. I look at Jesus, and Jesus looks back at me. This is sort of a picture of this dimension of prayer. It's just this relaxed, comfortable, confident sense of being under love, being held by love. This kind of prayer can be found, once you start looking for it, you can find it all over the Old Testament. I've got just a few verses here tonight that I selected to share. From Psalm 28, seek my face. My heart says to you, your face, Lord, do I seek. There's a sense of seeking God, attending God, looking for God's face. For God alone, O my soul, wait in silence. So there's quiet, there's patience, there's waiting. I wait for the Lord. My soul waits, and in his word I hope. My soul waits for the Lord more than watchmen for the morning. More than watchmen for the morning. You can imagine watchmen knowing my shift is done when dawn comes. So they're watching for them. You know, there's a sense of kind of looking out, being attentive. Be still before the Lord. Wait patiently for him. So Jesus was nursed on passages like this. They were his inherited tradition. And you wonder, in all these instances in the Gospels where it talks about Jesus going out and being away and being in prayer all night long, here are a few of them, whether some of this attending to his Father in this way was part of his prayer. It says, in the morning while it was still dark, Jesus got up, he left the house and went away to a secluded place and was praying there. But Jesus himself would often slip away to the wilderness to pray. It was at this time he went off to the mountain to pray, and he spent the whole night in prayer to God. You know, these are the sort of places that lovers go. You go to the mountains, you go away, you go to the wilderness, you go somewhere alone, you spend the night. There's a sort of a sense of yearning intimacy to these places that Jesus spent in prayer. And they have a fruit, they have a result, which is implied here in this John passage at the bottom of the page. Jesus says, very truly I tell you, the Son can do nothing by himself. He can only do what he sees his Father doing. For the Father loves the Son and shows them all that he is doing. You know, what is Jesus signaling here? There's some kind of a seeing. It's not a sort of a corporal seeing. We're not seeing a body, but there's an interior, there's something in you. It was put in you. It's created in us. It's a gift given to us to be able to see with our interior eyes. So there's kind of a beholding God. Sometimes this kind of prayer that I'm talking about is called contemplative prayer. Some people use that term for it, contemplative prayer. And it comes from the Latin word contemplative, meaning to see. So there is an enhanced interior seeing in this kind of prayer, a seeing into God, a seeing into ourselves, a more clear seeing into God's movement and activity around us. God gradually, as we cultivate this particular dimension of prayer, God gradually appears more present. He appears more capable. It looks as though he's up to good things in our lives and around us. So, the kind of prayer we're talking about is premised on this idea that Paul shares with us in the scriptures, that in some mysterious way, you and I are the temple of the Holy Spirit. In some mysterious way, you and I, God inhabits us as his home. And we're relaxing down into our home. It's like, oh, I'm at home. And I notice I have a guest. And I've been so busy, I've been walking past my guest. But now I've decided I'm going to just sit down with I'm going to recognize that I have this guest here. I'm going to have some tea or I'm going to have a meal with my guest. It's like the old Saint Meister Eckhart used to say, God is always at home. It is we who have gone for a walk. God is always home. We have become, distracted. But, so we don't have to, in this sort of prayer, we're not searching for God out there. We're not trying to convince God to come to us. It's a recognizing that, hey, isn't this amazing? I'm actually God's home. God actually lives within me, and I get to just sometimes, in a sort of an intentional, dedicated way, I get to just hang out with him there. So there are some distinct, gradually realized benefits or fruit to this dimension of prayer. And by the way, this is just that. It's just a dimension of prayer. It doesn't take the place of all other types of prayer. It's just a sort of somewhat forgotten or maybe a little bit ignored dimension of prayer that we're kind of putting forward tonight. And there are benefits to the exercise of this kind of prayer. I could name 100 of them. But we're going to look briefly at 5. I'm going to look briefly at 4 and then spend a little more time on the 5th one before we begin to practice this way of prayer together. Okay? First of all, this sort of relaxing down into our interior home with God cultivates relief in our lives, a sense of relief, rest for my overactive mind. It's a great relief to take a temporary vacation from the overactive mind's intense need to solve life, to figure everything out, to mentally debate with itself and with others. Wordless prayer, quiet prayer, contemplative prayer temporarily gives rest to the hang-ups and the frailties and the pestering patterns of the mind. We relax like a secure child in a love more deeply anchored and certain than our own shifting thoughts or feelings. Someone has said, the mind wants answers, but the heart wants rest. Our brain is continually searching for solutions, strategies to move through our fears, our needs, our goals. And that's all part of life. But the heart is yearning for rest. So there need to be moments cultivated into life that are about letting the heart rest. This is a sort of a Sabbath prayer. It's a Sabbath prayer in the sense that you're releasing timetables, you're releasing requirements, you're releasing active other working kinds of prayer for the moment, and you're just being. You're being with yourself and you're being with God. It's a little bit like if we were to go back to this example of the parent with the baby. Have you had this happen also? At least I have. We've had 3 children. And I remember holding my youngest son, David, and being in a sort of a magic moment, like I was describing earlier, when all of a sudden the door flies open and it's our 2 older children coming in. And they've had an argument, or they need Cheerios right now, or they need attending to. And so they come in, and my reaction would be, that's great. The things you're asking for are really genuine. You need them. Your requests are real, and I'm going to get to them, but I'm doing this right now. That's sort of like this sort of prayer. We're taking a Sabbath from all these other real needs, real responsibilities that we will pick up again in a little while, but we're taking a Sabbath from them for this 5 minutes, for this 10 or 20 minutes. It's a Sabbath sort of prayer. Another benefit is that you find over time your own real identity starts to firm up within you. In this place of gazing upon God and receiving God's loving gaze in return, we slowly start to comprehend who we really are. Oh, I'm a child. I'm a daughter. I'm a son. I'm not a slave to the culture. I'm not a slave to the culture or to the voices of my past or my old way of doing life. I'm not a religious employee who has to carefully, exhaustingly work for God's approval. I'm a beloved child. Life is safe. Everything's okay. All is well. The hardest spiritual discipline of our adult life is to receive the truth of our belovedness. It's something we deeply yearn for, but also we strangely resist and push away. This sort of prayer is consenting to be held in love. It's a repeated consent to be held in God's loving presence. And it begins over time to dissolve the resistance to receiving the truth of our belovedness, our core belovedness, our core identity. Release. Resting with God develops a growing inner posture of release. Release of debilitating fears, of rigid, too tightly held opinions and anxious strategies. Release of our need to control others and our environment in order to feel safe. Some people call this prayer the prayer of kenosis. Kenosis, if you're writing things down, is K-E-N-O-S-I-S. It's a Greek word that you find in the book of Philippians when it talks about Jesus emptying of himself in order to be available to his Father's wishes. So Jesus releases his prerogatives in heaven in order to be available to his Father. And that word kenosis means self-emptying. And this sort of prayer, there is a sort of a self-emptying, which it is and which it isn't. So the sort of self-emptying it is you're continually emptying yourself of your timetables, of your demands, of your need to get delivered out of your problem. You're continually releasing that. You're continually emptying yourself of that. And you're not emptying yourself in order to be empty, but you're emptying yourself in order to be available. In order to be available to something richer, something deeper, something more life-giving. So it cultivates this kind of posture of release. It cultivates a spirit of yes. Quietly attending God grows an interior spirit of yes, a spirit of open-heartedness and welcome toward God, ourselves, and others, toward new and life-giving ideas and experiences, toward people in pain, toward people we don't get. A spirit of yes. There's this old line I like a lot, an old prayer somebody prayed. It reads, "Lord, help me accept the truth about myself, no matter how beautiful it is." Help me accept the truth about myself, no matter how beautiful it is. This sort of prayer develops a spirit of yes to that. First we say yes to God. Then we find that we're saying yes to ourselves. We're embracing ourselves in a big yes. We're kind of slowly, gradually releasing a posture of critique, a posture of suspicion, a posture of creating distance between myself and others, myself and myself. And gradually, it's kind of replaced with a spirit of curiosity, interest, affirmation, even celebration. We want to celebrate God. We want to celebrate ourselves. We want to celebrate others. Finally, transformation. So all this is sort of moving toward a kind of an emerging way of life. One of the surprising and delightful results of wordless prayer is a slow, gentle, steadily deepening experience of personal transformation as our spirits become home to God's regular presence. As it says in 2 Corinthians, now the Lord is the Spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord is, there's freedom. I would like to share now an experience of transformation that I'm experiencing slowly but surely myself in regard to this sort of prayer. So I'd like to tell you a little story about something I experienced when I was a boy and how it's sort of traveled with me now into adulthood and how it's intersecting with this way of prayer. So when I was a boy, I grew up in central Minnesota in a small town, and by 4th or 5th grade, I was popular in the class. And in fact, I was, at least my perception of it was, I was the leader of at least half of the boys in my class. And then there was a guy who was sort of always my adversary for some reason. I didn't dislike him, but somehow he didn't like me very much. And so he was sort of the leader of the other half of the boys in my class. That's how I perceived it anyway. Well, so everything was fine though, until the summer after 5th grade, when somehow, or no, it wasn't the summer after, it was the spring of, while I was still in 5th grade, when for some reason, this other boy got the rest of the boys, all the boys in the class, to begin to shun me. and to mock me and to really make my life totally miserable. And it was like such a strange experience. I had no preparation for it. It came out of the blue. I didn't understand it. I didn't know how to be in it. And so I just began to avoid activities. I quit the baseball team in the summer because if I ever made a mistake playing ball, I would be mocked. And it was just so strange and painful. So then, that was the summer of after 5th grade. Came back into 6th grade, and everything was as it used to be. And there was all the bullying and the mocking, and that was all done. It was over. It was gone. And so 6th grade went great until the spring of 6th grade, when it started up again. And this time was worse. Now, a lot of the girls in the class were recruited to also mock me. And so this went on, and it was so bad that I would pretend to be sick so I wouldn't have to go to school. And my parents couldn't understand what was happening. They knew I really wasn't sick. They tried to talk to me about it, but of course you're in the 6th grade and you don't know fully what you're feeling yourself. And so 6th grade ended that way. Came back in the fall to 7th grade, and now for some reason, this fellow who'd always been sort of kind of had it out for me and was my adversary through elementary school, all of a sudden now he became my best friend. At least he acted as though he was my best friend. I was suspicious of it. I didn't trust it. It felt uncomfortable, but he acted like he's my best friend. He got me elected to be class president at the beginning of 7th grade. So, but, and then this thing of being shunned and mocked never happened again. All through the rest of junior high school, college, my adult life, that kind of experience, I've never had that experience again. But that experience at a young age, everything's going along great, then all of a sudden the bottom drops out, and then things are going great again, and then the bottom drops out again, and then things are going great again. That experience created an unconscious pattern in me. I wasn't aware of it until a lot later, but it created a wariness in my posture toward life and toward people. It created an assumption that that's, I guess, how life works. Things are going well, then the bottom unexpectedly drops out for no reason you can identify. Then things might go well again for a while, but then the bottom will drop out again. And so it created this wariness in me. And it created unconscious strategies for how you survive in a world like that. And I wasn't aware of it till way later, deep into my adult life, but my strategies for surviving a world in which all of a sudden the people around you can turn on you, my strategies included perfectionism, becoming perfect so nobody can find fault with you, right? Another strategy was to always keep emotional distance, even in your deepest relationships, even in your marriage, to keep emotional distance, to keep safe, because you don't know what might happen. Another strategy was to just keep my radar up all the time for rejection. To the degree that I could sense rejection in the room when there wasn't rejection, and you can kind of sabotage relationships unintentionally in that way. So, this was a sort of a small, repeated trauma that I experienced, which has had effects throughout my adult life. Some of us here have had much more serious traumatic experiences in life, right? Some of us have been physically abused, some have been emotionally abused, spiritually abused, some have been sexually abused. Some of us have experienced an abandonment, maybe through the death of a parent or a divorce in our family, or some loved one left us. Some of us have grown up around financial insecurity, and this has created a posture toward life. You know, there are just all these things we experience. Some of us have been betrayed by an authority figure who should have been trustworthy. Some of us have had physical illnesses or accidents that have taken away a physical ability that we always thought we would have. And so these, you know, this is the world in which we live. This is George Carlin's shocking world. And these create a sort of a trauma in us. Some of our trauma is conscious, but some of it is unconscious. Some of our conscious trauma we try through the help of our mind and our will to find insights and strength to make progress in life. But some of this trauma leaks down below the level of our awareness into our unconscious self, and it creates these patterns. Let's take a look at this. Trauma and wordless prayer. I got to apologize a little bit for it. We're going to do a fair amount of reading now for the next couple of minutes, and I just want you to have been exposed to this. It's also in your handouts to take home. I apologize if it's not you, if it's not all that helpful to you. It could be helpful to some of us. Where trauma goes. When we experience a trauma of some kind, especially in our childhood, abusive anger in the home, for example, insecurity concerning money, shaming by adults, the loss of a parent, the awareness of some physical imperfection, a physically violating abuse. Some of the unprocessed trauma deposits in our unconscious self below the level of our awareness. And even the low-grade daily trauma we experience, some of us haven't maybe had these very serious traumas described here, but just the low-grade traumas of everyday life. You know, we're fragile human beings living in this terrifically challenging world. It can deliver a kind of a trauma that leaks down below our awareness level. So this unconscious part of us creates an often distorted storyline about why we experienced the things we did. Adult anger, I deserved it. Shaming, I guess I'm shameful. The loss of a parent in death or divorce, even though it's irrational to think this way, the feeling can be, it was my fault somehow. Physical imperfection, I'm inherently deformed. A physically violating abuse, this just proves my unworthiness. The daily stresses of life, I'm alone, I'm in danger. Out of these false beliefs, our unconscious self offers survival strategies to help us get through life. But these strategies, created in shadow and as reactions against pain, often become imprisoning themselves. Over time, we might become aware of our false beliefs and misshapen survival strategies and try, with the help of our mind and will, to overcome them. But they are rooted so deeply out of reach in the dim recesses of our unconscious self that we find them difficult, if not impossible, to fully change. So, we're beautifully and wonderfully made, as the psalmist says, and we're pretty fragile. And the tough things we experience in life tend to lead to obscure strategies and vows and tactics for how to survive a life like this, you know? How to stay safe, how to create an identity, how to get through, you know, this kind of a life, how to hide my sadness, how to deal with my anger or my self-doubt, you know, just all these are things. So creates programs for surviving. And our programs are often hidden to us. We're not even aware of them, but they're not hidden to the people around us because they're often the victims of our programs. So as I said, I was in my adulthood before I began to even be aware of my own patterns and my own ways of coping and my own ways of surviving. And then it was some years later before I started to find some courage to do anything about it. And I did lots of things. I did counseling. I prayed a lot. I read my Bible. I told myself the truth. And all these things do help. And in my case, I did make progress, certainly. But there's a residue of these old traumatic experiences that can leak down into the nooks and crannies where our mind and our will can't access. This kind of prayer that we're talking about invites God into our deepest core self, even into our unconscious self. In my own case, in practicing this sort of prayer, you know, with regularity over some years, I began to notice a sort of a gentle loosening and dissolving and weakening of these patterns that had been so very imprisoning. And why is this? Why is this sort of possibility toward rich, deep, fundamental transformation connected to this particular way of prayer? Silent communion with God and healing. Wordless communion with God offers a dimension of healing from trauma that never exhausts its riches. Because silent, restful communion with God involves direct, spirit-to-spirit union, opening our spirits, consenting, inviting, welcoming God, opening our spirits, our core selves again and again to God's company in welcoming and immediate contact. God's Spirit has access to our deepest selves, even our unconscious selves, where God gradually softens, weakens, and gently dismantles our imprisoning false beliefs and strategies. I don't want to make this sound too neat and tidy. I don't think it is. It's not like it's a silver bullet or something to solve all our pain, to heal all our wounds. But many who practice contemplative prayer, wordless prayer, sometimes called centering prayer, many who practice this will testify to this idea of, it's kind of like, if you ever bake a casserole in the oven and you've had your meal now it's time to wash that casserole dish, what do? Do you attack it immediately? No, you probably do what most of us do. You put it in the sink, you put water in it, and you just let it sit. And you look at it, if you come back later and you look at it, you would say, there's nothing happening there. It's just sitting there in stillness, in quiet. It's not agitating, it's not working. It's just, it almost looks like nothing. But you come back in a little while later, and a lot of that can just be kind of easily removed. All that debris and all that baked on stuff can be. And that's what this sort of prayer is. This is a sort of a soaking, right? You're just soaking quietly, non-emotionally, you would look at it and think, there's nothing going on here. We're not feeling God. We're not in conversation with God. We're simply making our deepest self open to God, available to God. Okay. You can see we could talk about any of these dimensions for quite a long time, so we're really burning through a lot of stuff here tonight. I want to take a moment. In a moment, we're going to practice together, okay? Just so that we will have done it, experienced it. So we're going to do that. But I want to give you a moment in case anybody at this point has a question or an insight. Maybe this is a kind of prayer you know something about, and you have something that would be helpful for the room to hear. We're going to only take about 3 or 4 minutes right now, and we'll have a longer time for conversation before we're finished. But let's take 30 seconds of quiet and just check in with yourself and notice what questions are stirring right now. What seems interesting? Or what do you feel some resistance to? Just notice that first. And then I'll just open it up, no pressure. We don't have to, if there's no questions at this point, we'll just move forward. But just want to open it up for your thoughts or questions for a moment.
I'll bring you the microphone if you're afraid to get up.
Yes.
Or you can say it and I'll repeat it.
Okay, one has a very busy mind, and I'm a very word-oriented person. How does one get to the wordless?
If one has a very busy mind and I'm a very, what did you say?
I'm a very word-oriented person. Everything is words to me.
Yeah.
So how does one get to the wordless part? I don't know how to think without words.
I think you've just asked the question that is like, it's the central question. How do I let myself,
Yeah, I'm happy I caught on the title already. See, a way of wordless prayer. I'm in the title already.
yeah,
It's because I don't even know how to think or be quiet without words in my head.
yeah. Well, you do know, you haven't opened that door yet. I mean, you haven't maybe cultivated that muscle that you have a listening muscle we're equipped with. And it'd be like any muscle that isn't exercised or isn't, you might not even know you have it, or it doesn't feel very strong. So I just want to say, first of all, you do have it. And it's a matter of just, kind of like you would in any exercise program. You're going to begin to, exercise that thing. And it comes forward because first you have it, because God wants you to enjoy it. So you'll be aided in it. But that's a good question. And a good question, maybe it's your first question, because there's some energy around it, your first question to bring to God and be with God regarding. Later, when we come back to our second time for questions and answers, we're going to do some conversation about wandering minds, the wandering mind. So I think you'll find some stuff there. Anybody else? One more for now, and then, yes.
I have 2 things. One is the tax season, and one is the Christmas season where I have a hard time to keep focused just because
Could you speak a little louder?
I got a laryngitis. In the tax season and Christmas time, I have a hard time keeping focused. And like Sandy was saying, I don't know how to tunnel it to avoid being overloaded with too much. I don't know how to, I don't want to say categorize it. Keep it in perspective as far as a task-orientated thing. I just kind of ramble on as far as I try to do something and then I switch off to do something else. And I think that like it leads down to task and orientation to myself of probably maybe writing it down, I don't know. I tell my wife that all the time, she hears it.
Could you repeat that just a little bit? You're catching me at a time
During
when
the
I've been
tax
told
season?
I need hearing aids and I haven't got them yet. So that's my fault. Yes.
During the tax season and Christmas season, he has a hard time tunneling his thoughts into one spot. He tends to jump from one thing to the next.
Yep.
And he's, I think, is afraid that that's going to happen when he's doing the prayer, or will that help him when he's doing prayer? Will that prayer help him during those times to help calm down?
Yes and yes. It will happen. It's the thing that is the common denominator for everybody who practices this sort of prayer, is that the mind runs. I mean, we have trained our minds for decades, most of us, to jump from topic to topic to topic to topic, and we're not comfortable unless we have these little explosions of activity going on in our mind. So we have a lot of backlog of our brains operating in that way, and we're going to talk about that as when we talk about wandering thoughts in a little bit. But yes, also, as you exercise that listening muscle, that kind of quiet muscle inside of you, over time, the mind does cut new grooves. Our minds are plastic. We can learn new ways of being. Over time, the mind does cut new grooves, and you find yourself moving into the groove of quiet more easily and more naturally. All right, let's do this. Let's enjoy just a little bit of time praying in this way, and then we'll talk about it some more. Okay, look if you would, either at your handout or up on the, let's see. This is the way that we're going to pray now. These are sort of kind of ordinary, broadly used instructions for this kind of prayer. If you have in your home an habitual spot for prayer, you would just find your habitual spot for prayer. You might enjoy a psalm or a scripture to ready your heart, to warm your heart. You might take a timer so that you don't feel you need to glance at the clock to see how long. You might take a timer on your phone or something, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. It's often encouraged to pray in this way for 20 minutes or so, which might seem daunting when we just have first started. But it takes a little time to get in the groove, so 20 minutes is good. Place yourself in a position of relaxed attention. Let your deepest self welcome God. Just relax with God. This is very important. Release a need to feel God. Just lovingly be with God. Keep things light, loose, have no expectations or demands, but remain in your prayer mode. And when finished, be grateful for the time, however it went. Know you were with God. Once again, God, you are God's home. There's no way being here, driving in your car later, getting up tomorrow morning. There's no way that you're not with God. This prayer just sort of increases our sense, our realization that we are with God. All right, so what I'm going to do is I've got one verse from the Old Testament I'm going to read, very brief. I'm going to read it 3 times with some pause in between, like I did with the earlier verse. I'm going to read it 3 times, and then we're going to take 4 minutes of silence together for you to be with God. And I want to give you 3 ways to be with God. If this is too daunting for you, okay, so here are your options for the next 4 minutes. You can use this wordless prayer method that we've been talking about, and I'll put up the instructions again when we're done with this page. Or if you just feel tonight, I can't just sit here quietly, intentionally in that way with God, here are a couple other possibilities. Just picture a scene of yourself with God. Maybe picture yourself as Mary listening at Jesus' feet, or the Apostle John in the book of John where he's resting his head on Jesus' breast. Or be as those beloved children who are on Jesus' lap in the book of Mark. You know, just picture yourself in any restful, quiet place that allows your heart to wordlessly be with God. Or the third one, doodle a picture of yourself in a quiet place, relaxing with God. And just enjoy God. Let God enjoy you. So if I could, I'd push you toward number 1. But you know yourself. You do what works for you. Here's that instruction that we looked at a moment ago. So 3 times with the Bible verse, followed by 4 minutes of silence. I'll read the Bible verse again to bring us back out of the silence, and then we'll go from there. For God alone, O my soul, wait in silence. For God alone, O my soul, wait in silence. For God alone, O my soul, wait in silence. For God alone, O my soul, wait in silence. Amen. As we move into some conversation about this, I'd like you to look at these questions on your handout or on the screen. Having had this short prayer experience, one or two things I find attractive or intriguing about this way of prayer are 10 or 12 things I find challenging about it are. Why don't you give yourself a minute or two with those questions, and if you have thoughts, maybe jot them down or. And now, why don't we start, why don't you turn next to somebody next to you and just debrief a little bit. What was this experience like for you? What was interesting, intriguing about it? What was difficult, irritating? Whatever your experience was, just take a few minutes with the person next to you and just kind of debrief a little bit, and then I'll call us back together in a bit. We'll take another couple minutes. Well, excuse me for interrupting. Why don't we pull back together? Any Baptists or former Baptists present with us tonight? Okay, just a couple of us. Okay, I'm going to tell you a Baptist joke. And I allow myself to tell this joke because I attended a Baptist seminary, and our Baptist professor told us this joke and asked us to share it broadly. No, he didn't ask us to share it broadly, but my heart wants to share it broadly. So here's the joke. How many Baptists do you invite to go ice fishing with you? How many Baptists do you invite to go ice fishing with you? At least 2. If you invite 1, he'll drink all your beer. If you invite 2, they won't drink any of your beer. So we're picking on the Baptists, but every denomination, every group, every religious tribe has its expectations and its sort of ways of behavior that we look at one another and we're supposed to behave like this. But that's a way of connecting God with behavior and critiquing and scrutinizing, and it's not life-giving, right? It doesn't feel good in the end when our life with God is about our behavior. Because we know we're wise. There's a wisdom deep inside of us that's calling us inward, that's calling us to the fountain, sort of to the wellspring. So hopefully this dimension of prayer we're talking about can be one of those kind of ways to dip into this deep wellspring. So let's finish our time out here with letting me ask you this question, this first question first. What is attractive to you about this way of praying? What seems intriguing? Or makes you feel like, well, there could be possibilities there that I would like to explore a little further. Just on an emotional level, what feels attractive to you? What's appealing? It's calming. Even in this setting, felt a little bit calming. Yeah. It's powerful to be with others in silence. And people who practice this sort of prayer often find small groups to do this with. They're mutually supportive. And there's a power in sitting silently, attentively with one another. Yeah. Anybody else?
Centered or channeled.
Yep. Feels you were even able in that short time and in this place to feel that way a bit. Yeah. Neat. Mm-hmm.
Peaceful.
Peaceful. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Not about doing.
How about the challenges? What was difficult, or what seemed hard? Anything? Coming up with the right words to say and to pray about. Well, in this prayer, you can relieve yourself of the responsibility to pray any words. Because this is sort of like, if you think of sitting on the porch, watching the sun go down with someone you love. There are moments when You just don't need to speak. You're just there in this beautiful moment, and you're with one another. That's sort of at the heart of this sort of prayer. We can, for the moment, we can relieve ourselves of the need to say anything. Anybody else?
Challenging was quieting the mind.
Quieting the mind, yeah, for sure, yep. In your handout or here, wandering thoughts. And by the way, this I think is on a card. Susan, do people have this card with them? Yes. Okay.
If you look at your rings of tools we gave you, it's the last card that is on there. And it will say WellSpring on the back.
It's a double-sided card. On one side are the sort of the bullet points we went through for how to pray in this way. And on the other side of that,
it looks like this. Listening for God in quiet, a way of wordless prayer.
yeah. So you can go away with a method for this. And then on the other side are these ideas about wandering thoughts, because this is the thing that plagues most people and discourages many people from continuing. But the first thing is, when the mind wanders, what do? You try to control those thoughts? You try to not have wandering thoughts? No, you just expect them. When the mind wanders, just return to your intention to be with God. Somebody said, if your mind wanders 1,000 times, that's 1,000 opportunities to return to Jesus. Kind of a beautiful way to think about it. Don't fight thoughts or try to have no thoughts. Don't hassle yourself about wandering thoughts. Expect them. Simply return to God. Let the thoughts be in your head, but renew that attentiveness in your heart to be with God. Somebody said, I feel so bad. My mind wanders all the time. It's as though I wasn't with God. And somebody responded, who can say that in the nanoseconds between your wandering thoughts, God didn't get in there? Who can say that God can be successfully opposed by your wandering mind? God's intention is to draw near and wants to be with you in that way. So I think this is the main thing about wandering thoughts, is don't hassle yourself that you have them. You will have wandering thoughts. We just are so, we've cultivated a mind that wanders for a long, long time. And so it's got a momentum behind it. It's hard to stop immediately. But the thing is, you compound your problem when you get down on yourself for having wandering thoughts. It's better to simply expect them. When you notice you have them, release them, return to your intention to be with God. When attention drifts, maybe say a word that signifies your intention to be with God. Some people, when they pray in this way, identify a word, and that's going to be my word that's going to remind me to re-anchor in my intention to be with God. My own words, I have two words, my own words are Jesus Christ. I can't tell you how many thousands of times I've repeated those words in this prayer. And what they do after a time is they begin to grow in your awareness as what is re-anchoring me in my quiet with God. So that just even the speaking of that word can help bring you back to that place of attentiveness. So perhaps choose a word, Jesus, abide, welcome, or any word that renews your intention to be with God. When you notice that your mind has wandered, just speak your word. And that reminds you, this is why I'm here right now. Finally, to further anchor your intention to be with God, maybe bring an image to mind, like we talked about earlier. Sometimes it's helpful to bring one of these biblical images to mind. Mary Mary at Jesus' feet, John on Jesus' breast, etc. So that word, a picture, those can both be helpful in re-anchoring yourself in your place there with God. Anybody else? Thoughts, insights, questions? Who has been practicing this sort of prayer over time? Yes, tell us about it a little bit. Can you give us any tips or any experience?
I was just going to say, when I first started, it was really, really hard for a person who's an extrovert to sit without anybody and without saying anything. It was hard. So you work your way up to the 20 minutes. Just do what you can.
Yeah.
And I think the important thing to say is God delights in even you trying. You don't have to be successful at it. There's no way to be successful. He just delights in the fact that you are giving him 20 minutes of your time, that you can just sit and be with him. He delights in that. And so you can't mess it up. Even if you have thoughts.
No.
You know, sometimes when I'd start, my word is peace. And sometimes I'd just have to be like, peace, 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 peace. And it doesn't matter, because you will see the fruits of the prayer.
Yeah.
It might not be at that second, it might not be that day, but you will see the fruits. One thing that it gave me is patience. Because, you know, if I had to wait 3 minutes for my kids and they were supposed to be there at 3 o'clock and they didn't come out till 3:03, I was mad. But after I started doing this, I could be, you know, it's okay. I can just be at peace right now, and I can wait. You know, it's okay. So I really would recommend trying it. And, you know, you said it's not a silver bullet. I think it is.
It's not what?
You said that it maybe wasn't is that the right terminology? You said it wasn't a silver bullet, I think you said.
A silver bullet.
I think it is, because God's language is silence. And so he really honors that, and I would very much recommend it. So, and you did a great job. It's really, really good. Thank you.
Thank you. Getting back to the baby and the parent kind of a thing, isn't one of the most precious things that happens when you're with that child and you're looking into one another's eyes, and then the baby's eyes kind of go, and they fall asleep, and then they wake up and they look at you again for a little bit, and I always take that as kind of, it's like, you know, me and my prayer time. I might fall asleep, my mind is wandering all over, but I think the parent, just enjoys the fact that, like you said, that you've chosen, God is the place that you're going to be now for the next 15 minutes, whatever, 20 minutes. God delights in it. You said something very important, you can't make a mistake. You can't do anything wrong. Because you're always with God. We're just enhancing our realization that we are always with and in Christ. Yes, and did you have something to add? The other prayer next to you? Yes.
I just wanted to also repeat what you had said about practicing and practicing and practicing, and don't expect yourself to get it right away.
No.
I had yoga this morning, and it's a practice. In doing this kind of praying, I've done it over the years with Pastor Valerie and at retreats and other things. And I can do it, but there's still times where it's still hard, but those muscles are there and they're stretched enough where they say, oh yeah, I remember this, you can do this. So keep trying.
Yeah, it's not magic, and it's not for an elite group of prayers. It's like anything else you practice. If you had never driven a car in your life, and now you're going to walk out of this building and try to drive a car home, we'd all be in trouble if we were on the road with you. You've practiced that over time. Now it becomes second nature. It's just the same thing. Anybody else? Yes.
I say a prayer every morning when I'm going to work.
Yep. You say a prayer every morning when you're going to work.
One of the managers where I work had put down a comment that I was a very patient employee,
Cool.
which the managers are always watching the employees. And I think I work on it you have to work at it every day.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
Cool. Well, I want to honor our time. We're over here already. Let me just say one final thing to close. I was with a group, something like this, some years back, and somebody came up to me afterwards and said, "Thank you for your presentation. But is there anything, looking back on your life and all this life with God and your spirituality and stuff, is there anything you would have done differently?" And at the moment, I just thought, no, everything is a learning experience, and it's all part of, you're just learning. But then the next day, I thought, like I often do when I'm, later I think, well, this is what I should have said. This is what I wish I would have said. And when I look back on this exercise of prayer, my walking through the abuse stuff, and my way through and out somewhat of that, my life generally, if I look back, and if there's one thing I would have done differently, is I would have loved myself more. I would have loved myself. I would have given myself a lot more grace, a lot more room. That is the center of the heart of God, is to surround us with this kind of caring. And I'll just finish by repeating something I said earlier. This sort of prayer is every day consenting to be cared for by God, consenting to be loved by God. And it can feel selfish at first, but it then soon takes root in you, and you find that you become a font of caring to first your family, then to the people around you, then to your neighborhood and the world. You become that caring presence. So with that, let me just read a benediction over us, unless maybe you have some thoughts you want to. Yeah, go right ahead.
I just want to thank you all for a fantastic second Restore series. It's been great, wonderful to learn all these new tools. I hope you are able to take the toolbox home with you and go through them and actually try them. It helps when you practice. And how many of you feel a little bit more rested after just closing your eyes? And I know it's that peace. And if you do that for 5 minutes during the day, just try to keep your thoughts away and just listen to your breath, you will feel rested. It's amazing how much that and God can fill you up during that time. So thank you for teaching us that today. So use your tool cards. We really appreciate that. Joel also has some extra little cards out there that you could actually put another little hole in them, add to your toolkit. They're out on where his books are out there. He also is leading a Lenten series or workshop. There's information on that out on the table right when you leave. And I want you all to pick up, if you can fill out an evaluation form, I'll also be sending that email. That would be awesome to help us decide what to do in the future for you guys. We are here to do things for you, to teach you and give you tools. And tonight, pick up a chocolate because it's Valentine's Day tomorrow, and we want you all to think about love, God's love, and it's in all of you and the people all around you, and do some random act of kindness tomorrow to someone, and have a lovely day. And the other thing is, we have these pocket squares, and they're handmade by Jan, who is here today. She made over 80 or 90 of them for the series, but she's made hundreds for me. And this is what it says, so please take one on your way out. This little pocket square was made especially for you. Keep it as a touchable reminder in your pocket, diaper bag, or purse throughout the day when your fingers touch the cross. Remember that Jesus is your friend. Remember that God is with you at all times. As the day closes and night falls, place this pocket prayer square under your pillow, knowing that you and your family are treasured and protected by a loving God. So take one of those on their way out and have a fabulous, fabulous evening. And Joel has one more thing to say. I think.
Just briefly, this is a little bit late in the game, but Saturday, I'm offering a one-day retreat. Information is out there. Some of these themes would show up. It won't be the same, but it's kind of letting God be with us in the particular season of life we find ourselves. So changes, transitions, how is God with me in this season of change and transition? Information about the retreat is on the table.
Go in peace. Serve the Lord.